Right. Well, welcome everyone and Happy New Year. I hope everyone has had a generally stress-free beginning to the new year. It's been great to finish up the last few CBCs that have been going on and start getting some new birds on the year list. My name is Alex Sowers. I am as of last November, the new editor for WOS News. So I will be compiling any bird articles that are applicable to the seasonal release. I'm going to do editions by season. And so if anyone has anything particularly interesting about winter birds or winter birding or any experiences they've had, they should send an email to editor@was.org. So editor@was.org. Tonight, I am honored to kick off this meeting, this first meeting of 2026, with our special guest, Phil Mitchell. He'll be talking about AI, which, as many of us understand, is a very revolutionary topic and something that I am just beginning to grasp and understand the utility of. And so Phil is going to give us an excellent insider look onto how AI can be used to become a better birder and, all the tools that AI provides us. But before we get into Phil's talk here, I'm just going to go over a couple announcements on behalf of WOS. I can get through these slides here. Well, I'll start this out. I know many of us are, I'm sure, members of WOS, but if you aren't a member of WOS, I highly suggest taking that next step and becoming part of Washington's birding community. It's a great community to be a part of. And if you're not like fully into eBird yet, and maybe you're just paying attention to birds in your backyard, it's really a organization for anyone who cares about birds. And there are benefits beyond just being part of the community. You get Birds of the World complimentary, and you have the ability to contribute to the organization through the newsletter. And I just really want to emphasize that I really want to hear what people have to say about news and birding news, because I really want to bring back a really thorough newsletter. But yeah, I highly suggest people join WOS and get that membership. With no further ado, I'm just going to touch on a couple more things. The president position, for the first time and maybe forever, the president position for WOS is vacant. We have a lot of great officers and board members. So if you or you have a colleague or anyone who is really interested in potentially having that president position, I recommend speaking up, sending an email to board@wos.org. It's in the bottom left there. And it'll be a great opportunity to work alongside our Vice President, John Isakoff, Secretary John Houghton, and our Treasurer, Dick Holcomb, along with the whole board, which is really a great experience. The whole dynamic between the board and just figuring out what's going to happen next in the bird community. I'm going to talk here about the conference happening in mid-May. Will be, for the first time, it'll be in the southeast corner of Washington, which has a special place in my heart. I think it's something that, growing up in Seattle, I was always excited to go to the east side of the Cascades to go birding because it's just so different from the west side. And every time I went out to the east side, I go to Kittitas County or Chelan County, and it was always super cool, seeing Ses phoebes and mountain chickadees. But I never dreamed of having the ability to travel all the way to the southeast corner of the state, where it's, you get really serious with those interior species. And so, now that I have the ability to drive around, and now that I go to Washington State University and live nearby this area, I've been just super excited and happy every time I get out to be in a climate that's just so different than what most people perceive as Washington State birding. Most people think of Washington State birding as rainy, wet, a lot of moss, but the southeast corner of the state is a really amazing place because there are these dry, rocky canyons and sandy rabbit brush areas with all different types of birds. There's mountain quail, native mountain quail down there, and the Blue Mountains are fantastic. So we'll have lots of field trips led down there. And so if you might not be well acquainted with that area, but still have an interest in learning about some of the birds, there are many field trips, and those field trips will be posted on the WOS website. So if you have any interest in being led by some people knowledgeable of the area, it's a really great opportunity to get into that. And on top of that, there are some additional field trips coming out soon. So while we do have the annual conference where there will be trips there, Penny Rose will be leading a couple field trips, as well as John Isakoff. Penny Rose will be leading a field trip to Vashon, and there will be another field trip to the west side, while John Isakoff is leading a field trip around Grant County. Also, these are February dates, late winter. And so if you're curious about those field trips, I highly suggest checking out the WOS website, as are most of the notices and announcements for WOS. Those are another excellent opportunity to really learn more about Washington birding. And finally, I'd like to give a brief land acknowledgement. Our enjoyment and study of birds of their habitats extends across vast and far-flung regions. WASP respectfully acknowledges these lands are the current and traditional homelands of the indigenous tribes and peoples of the Pacific Northwest. Today, we offer our respect for their history and culture and their wisdom in caring for these places from time immemorial and for generations to come. We encourage all to tread gently and treat these places with respect. So without further ado, I'd like to pass this on to Sammy, who will pass it off to Phil. Thank you.
Phil lives in Seattle. He has a baccalaureate degree from Yale University in mathematics, and he earned his doctoral degree in cognitive psychology from Boston University. For over 20 years, Phil has worked as a computer programmer, a software developer, and a senior engineer. He has combined his knowledge of learning and his skills as a programmer and developer to create learning apps, such as a Spanish language app. In 2010, Phil took a big leap and became an entrepreneur and founder of Larkwire. He created an interactive game-based learning platform to help users learn bird songs. Phil is passionate about conservation, and a portion of the proceeds from his Larkwire app sales go to fund conservation projects. Locally, Phil has made a positive impact on the sustainability and climate change efforts by sharing his technical expertise with nonprofit groups. In his free time, Phil enjoys outdoor activities such as backpacking. Thank you so much, Phil, for sharing your knowledge of this fascinating topic.
Thanks very much, Sammy and Was. Let's see. It's really fun to be here, and I guess I want to start by saying I really like learning, and I'm pretty sure that everybody in this virtual room really likes learning also. And there's a surprising amount that's known now through cognitive psychology about how to be a better learner, how to be more efficient and more effective as a learner. And that's going to be the focus of my talk tonight. I hope this isn't bait and switch. We did put AI in the title of the talk, but really I'm going to talk more about the science of learning, but we will get to the AI apps. And I'll also wrap up by talking a bit about how all of this science of learning is composed into the learning system that I call Larkwire. So let's get started. Before I jump into the learning science, I want one disclaimer about being a better birder. A lot of my examples tonight will be about bird identification, but I just want to say up front, of course, there's so much more to birding than bird ID. And really, any aspect of birding that involves learning can benefit from these things that we'll be talking about tonight. So, science of learning. Um, Tonight, I'm going to cover 3 tactics and a strategy. There's tons more that we could talk about, many more topics from cognitive science and cognitive psych, but the ones that I'm going to cover tonight are really some of the most important and best validated findings in science, in the science of learning. Let's start with the test effect. Just hang on one second here. There we go. So the test effect is the finding that recall is a much better memory builder than repetition. What does that mean? So when I was a kid and I first tried to learn things, I would approach it by reading the same paragraph over and over again, as if my memory was a wax tablet, and every time I read it, the grooves in the wax tablet got a little deeper. And I think that's a very common mental model we have about memory, but it's really not a good model of how memory works. And it turns out that repetition is not effective at building memory, not nearly as effective as active recall. Now, why is Benjamin Franklin up here? The amazing Ben Franklin figured this out for himself. He developed a system of reading where at the bottom of each page, he would put the book aside and try to remember as much as he could from what he had just read. And that turned out to be an amazing way to really absorb what he was learning. Perfect example of active recall and the test effect. So, number 2, spaced repetition. Now that we know how to practice in principle, in other words, somehow testing ourselves, the question is, when should we practice and how often should we practice? And spaced repetition is one answer to that. There are really 2 approaches to practice organization. One is termed massed practice, and the other is spaced repetition. So massed practice is practicing a lot all at once. Now, generations of college students have shown their preference for this approach when they cram the night before an exam. And it turns out that is a pretty good strategy if all you care about is remembering what you studied for one day. It turns out to be a terrible strategy if you care about remembering that content in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years from now. A much better strategy is to spread out your practice in time. And it turns out there's a very strong relationship between the amount of time you'll remember something and the spacing that you use between your practice sessions. So with that background, we can we can unpack what's going on in this somewhat confusing, but actually really remarkable graph. If you look at the little blue box in the upper left corner, that's our first exposure to something we want to learn. And the blue dotted line that comes down from that blue box is what's called the forgetting curve. It's a graph of the probability that we'll remember it sometime in the future. The x-axis here is time and the y-axis is the probability. As you can see, The forgetting curve shows us that over time, the probability will remember that whatever it was in that blue box uh, diminishes essentially exponentially. Uh, that's not really news to us, but the interesting part is what happens when we practice. So this red box next to the blue box is the first time we practice that same item. And you'll notice that with each successive practice, the forgetting curve is flattening out. Now, that's really quite a remarkable thing. What that's telling us is that I won't have to practice that. I won't have to practice that as soon as the first time I practiced it. I can wait longer. I'll remember it for longer until the next time I need to practice it, and so forth. And that has led to the development of learning systems called spaced repetition systems, which really try to optimize this. And the goal of a good spaced repetition system is to model your individual forgetting curve so that it presents each item that you need to practice right before you're about to forget it. So you can build a long-term memory with the absolute minimum number of exposures. And that is the sort of the holy grail of practice efficiency. So we talked about test effect and we talked about spaced repetition. Now, both of those tactics have to do with building long-term memory. But not all learning is about building memory. So the third tactic I'm going to present is perceptual discrimination training. This is about learning to see or hear, learning to perceive differences that at first seem indistinguishable. Now, in the lab, cognitive psychologists who do perceptual discrimination training have demonstrated some amazing phenomena. People, just ordinary folks, can learn to discriminate things like two shades of the same color that look to us absolutely identical. In the lab, under the right conditions of practice, they become different shades of blue. In a more practical sense, what you see here on the screen is a screenshot from Larkwire. This is at an advanced level where Larkwire is teaching the discrimination of blue-winged teal and cinnamon teal females, which, as you know, is a challenging one. The basic process, though, is simple. Perceptual discrimination training works through starting with relatively easy discriminations and progressing through stimuli that become harder and harder. So let's talk now about learning strategy. K. Anders Ericsson is the psychologist who coined the term deliberate practice. And this came out of his work studying experts, many of whom were experts in fields like chess or music, where expert performance is just on a whole nother level from people who are not experts. And he wanted to know how they became that way. Many people see an amazing musician or a chess master and feel certain that it's an inborn talent. And of course, there is a role for talent. But Erickson showed that a certain type of practice was necessary. Essentially, even with prodigies, he found that these experts that he was studying all went through some version of what he came to call deliberate practice. In other words, practice is essential, but not just any type of practice. And the way that he characterized deliberate practice has a number of components. First of all, this is not incidental learning. This is focused and effortful learning where you are giving your full attention to tasks that are challenging but not too challenging. It invariably involves lots of little steps, um, done repeatedly with gradual improvement. Uh, in deliberate practice, you're always working towards specific goals, and when you reach a goal, you define a new set of goals. Feedback is very important. You're always getting feedback on are you is this in the right direction? Is this in the wrong direction? Is your answer right? Is your answer wrong? And as you become more advanced, it becomes more and more necessary that you have truly expert guidance and typically expert content that is developed by experts so that you know that you are so that you can stay on a track that's leading you towards in the right direction. A lot of that may sound kind of obvious, but when you put that all together and you start to think about your own learning practice, um, I think you'll find that um, thinking about deliberate practice as a specific type of organization of your learning, it's really a very helpful tool. Okay, let's talk about the AI apps. And the two that I'm going to mention here are Cornell's Merlin app and iNaturalist, the iNaturalist app. The first thing I want to say about these apps is they are truly astonishing. It hasn't been, it really hasn't been that long since we struggled to make computer programs that could distinguish a cat from a house. And now we have software, we have apps on our phones that can readily distinguish an alder flycatcher from a willow. And most of the time they're right. They're not always right, but very often they are. And that is an astonishing achievement. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit, just a little, about how they work and about some of their limitations, and and um, and then talk a little bit about, from my perspective, how they fit into the toolkit as learners who want to use these to become a better birder. So first of all, these amazing apps are not LLMs. They're not Chat GPT, which you've undoubtedly heard of. And that's a good thing because, as you may know, these large language models are known to hallucinate. And we birders do plenty of hallucination ourselves without needing machines to help us do that. So if they're not LLMs, what are they? Well, they fall under the rubric of machine learning. And that's a very broad category that uh, is a type of software where the algorithm gets trained um, through a process that relies uh, on data that we provide to the generic algorithm. The specific family of machine learning algorithms that these apps use are known as deep convolutional neural nets. We're not going to go into that. But the part of this that is quite relevant and interesting to us is they fall in the bucket that's known as supervised learning. And what does that mean? Well, you can think of a CNN as a big equation or a set of equations. It's a generic equation that can be used to categorize or make predictions about just about anything. But it won't work very well until it's trained. And the way you train it, so let's talk about the data that we use to train these models. Um, Here we have a picture of a robin. We're going to represent that picture as basically a giant matrix of numbers. And uh, with supervised learning, we provide a whole bunch of these images, not only of robins, but lots of different species, as input to the learning process. And the key part here is that all of these images are labeled with what species they are. Now, there is machine learning that's unsupervised, meaning you don't need to pre-label the inputs. But for the models, the types of models that we're interested in here, these are supervised and they rely on data that is labeled. And then once they're trained, well, training, what does that do? That lets the software adjust some of the parameters in this giant equation. And now that it's customized to bird species, if I feed in a picture that is never seen of one of these species, it will be able to tell us, most likely, it will be able to tell us what that species is. Now, here's the catch. It's easy to provide 500 examples of American robin that are correctly labeled. Um, but if you think about alder and willow flycatchers, it's a lot harder to provide 500 uh, photos of each of those species and be certain that they are correctly labeled. And so that is one of the key challenges in developing these models, and it leads us into their limitations. So the first limitation is they're not always right. There are a variety of reasons why they get things wrong sometimes, but one of the key reasons is that almost invariably errors creep into the training data, and if there are errors in the training data, then there are likely to be errors in the outputs. Um, The second limitation I'll put out here, it has more to do with our psychology, and that is they seem like they're always right. Right? We are used to machines like calculators that are always right. And that's kind of what we expect from a machine. But these new systems are just simply not like that. And um, you know, we're just on the cusp of this age of AI that is absolutely transformational. And we're only just beginning to learn how to work with these tools. And maybe the kids who grow up with these AIs will internalize the idea that they are fallible. But for right now, we have to, I think, continuously remind ourselves that they are. There's another interesting I put here in a question mark. I don't know if it's fair to actually call it a danger, but there are some interesting studies about cognitive behavior when using AI apps. There's one that comes out of MIT, something I think called "This is Your Brain on ChatGPT," and they literally did some neural imaging um, of people when they're using AI apps and when they're doing other kinds of cognitive work. And both of these studies, the finding is that these apps kind of put your brain to sleep. And I think that's really going to be, in a way, my theme of this brief review of AI apps is um, be careful about letting it put your brain to sleep. Um, and the so the last thing, which I only threw in here at the last minute, you know, Merlin is amazing. Give it a decent recording of a bird sound, and it will probably tell you what that species is. But if you let that tool prevent you from actually learning that sound, those sounds, and internalizing it so that you know what those sounds are, you're 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 missing out on an incredibly delightful experience because being out in the forest or where in any habitat where you're hearing birds and knowing what you're hearing, it's almost like being in a foreign country and being able to speak the language. And it's truly a delight. I'm sure I don't have to sell that to anyone on this Zoom, but I felt I wanted to say that. Let's see. So AI apps, tools for learning, question mark. I have to comment this, I love this photo. This is, I hope you can see it well enough. This is an AI generated image. And I asked the AI to put a bird up in the tree, and it somehow chose a common kingfisher and scaled it crazy large. And despite several attempts, I was never able to get um, it to have the birder with binoculars actually looking at the bird. Somehow that seems poetically appropriate. Um, when I was first asked about the idea of using Merlin as a learning app, I was honestly puzzled. If you go back to that slide about deliberative practice, it doesn't meet any of those criteria. Um, I think of Merlin as a kind of field guide. It certainly is a kind of field guide, but it's a field guide that just tells you the answer. Now, certainly field guides are learning tools, but I would argue that most of the learning happens when you wrestle with your field guide. You go back to those images uh, images of gulls, and you're puzzling out the differences and the similarities between what you're seeing and what the field guide shows. And there's so much opportunity for learning in the puzzling. This is part and parcel of the test effect, right? This is active. We're actively trying, well, yeah, we're actively trying to puzzle out the answer rather than being just given the answer. So does that mean that these AI apps are not useful learning for learning at all? I would not say that. Um, but what I would say is use them as a last resort if you want to use it for learning. So if you're out in the field and you hear something and you're not sure what you're hearing, um, puzzle it out. Try other ways to puzzle it out before you resort to just going to the back of the book and looking up the answer. Um, because that's what Merlin does. It just gives you the answer. So I want to just take a few minutes to talk about how Larkwire is put together as a learning system. Um, it currently it covers sound ID, visual ID, and bird topography. As a learning system, it incorporates the test effect, spaced repetition, perceptual discrimination, and deliberate practice. That's the structure of the learning system, but it's that really leaves out half of the story because a learning system depends on content, and that content is extremely important also. Larkwire currently uh, uh, is limited to North American courses, and for those courses, we have about 2,500 recordings and over 10,000 photos. We cover North American species and quite a few border species. Uh, One of the things that makes Larkwire special is that uh, I've been fortunate to work with some of the top, really some of the top birders, field birders in North America, and uh, their expertise is a key part of what makes deliberative practice work. So I'm going to stop sharing the keynote here and switch over to a brief demo, and you can see what a deliberative practice system looks like in action. So I hope you can see this. Um, This is Larkwire with a couple of courses loaded into it. Western landbird songs, Western breeding plumage, bird topography, and one playlist that I put together for Wiley Slough. Um, let's focus in on the uh, the sound course. If you were to open this up for the very first time, this is what you would see. And for people in WOS, getting practice distinguishing American Robin from Blackcap Chickadee song might seem ridiculous, but I can assure you that for a total beginner, um, I've had beginners say to me, all bird sounds sound the same. And that's the reality, that's the psychological reality. So if you need to, you can start at the very beginning and begin the process of learning to discriminate bird sounds with these relatively easy sounds. Um, this is the beginning level. Let's hop up to the intermediate level. So with the intermediate level, we're the first group is a robin-like group, and we can preview some of these sounds. And then we can begin perceptual discrimination practice like this. And if we make a mistake, we learn from it and then we keep going. So as you see, Larkwire begins with the perceptual discrimination phase, which makes sense because you can't memorize something if you can't discriminate it. Now, these groups, here we're at the intermediate level. We've got robin-like and warblers and finches and so forth. These groups are, in a way, the heart of Larkwire because these are the similar sounding songs that you're likely to confuse. And Larkwire is going to take you on a learning journey where group by group you practice perceptual discrimination across these different groups. Now I'm going to jump ahead a few weeks or months. You certainly don't need to finish all those groups before you get to the next stage, but I'm going to artificially speed things up here. This perceptual discrimination game is we call the gallery game. I'm going to switch us over to the field game. And let's throw in a couple of groups because this is what Larkwire will gradually do. So now we're in a game that's more like real birding, where we're hearing something and we either know it or we don't know it, and we're getting feedback on whether we got it or not. And this is a classic spaced repetition system. It is Larkwire is tracking which ones you struggle with and which ones you find easy, and it is scheduling your practice to try to make your practice as efficient as possible. Initially, you will practice one group at a time, but over time, Larkwire will add in more and more groups. The other thing you can do here, one of the interesting, I should say, important aspects of Larkwire is that although it will walk you through the entire process from beginner to advanced, you can jump in at any time and take control of that process and study exactly what you want to study. For example, if there are two warblers that are not in the same group, but you find you're having trouble distinguishing them, you can create a custom gallery game and just practice that particular challenge. Let's see. Now, when we go up to advanced level, we also start with another robin-like group, but you'll see that this robin-like group has more species in it and more challenging discriminations. And that is characteristic of deliberative practice. We go from easy to hard. Um, the other thing I wanted to show here um, is that we've got these amazing explanatory tips from Michael O'Brien and other authors, so that if you're um, struggling with a particular comparison, uh, these tips can offer guidance on what to listen for and how to think about the sounds that you're wrestling with. That can be absolutely invaluable. Let's see. Um, Here we are in the visual course. It's very similar. I'm going to jump up to the master level and just show that if you're really up for a challenge, here we have some some of the hardest visual ID challenges, um, fox sparrow subspecies, the two sage sparrows, and so forth. Really good stuff here. And Steve Mladenau's tips are just extraordinary and very detailed to tell you how he thinks about differentiating these easily confusable species. The last thing I'll throw in here, just because it's fun, is our new bird topography course, authored by Dennis Paulson. Um, this is quite different. Uh, this isn't really a perceptual discrimination course. Uh, um, it uses a slightly different learning model, although it's certainly building on the test effect and spaced repetition scheduling. Um, this this is an interactive graphic that we can um, explore, and then we can start the game. And got an easy one here. And if I make a mistake, I get feedback. And this is a great way to master the external anatomy that may have eluded you. Now, this is um, we in this we start out with an illustration for simplicity, but whoops, we go up to a more advanced level, you'll see that we can do exactly the same thing uh, with real photos, and it's fabulous practice. So where are the median coverts on here? Oh, those are lessers. There we go. Oh, I guess I need to practice more on my shorebirds. In any case, that's just that's a quick demo of Larkwire. And that's the conclusion of my talk. I'll be happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Excellent. Folks, wow. Doug Santoni, what is the more challenging aspect for AI, the visual or the sound?
Well, so the interesting thing about that is that the sound classification that Merlin does is actually visual. The way that Merlin is trained, it's trained on spectrograms of sounds, and so when you when you feed it an American Robin song, what it actually does is it computes a spectrogram on the fly. In other words, a visual representation of that um, sound, and then it feeds it into the model. So it's all visual. Uh, um, yeah, that's a short answer.
Thank you. Let's see, there, technology is throwing curves at me here. Let me mention this one thing, which I think is right on. Sometimes so hard to find them. Come on, Monique.
You,
If anyone wants to unmute, feel free to. But I would like to read this one out and enhance it a little bit. Monique wrote, curious, Phil, about your thoughts on the tendency of some birders to heavily depend on Merlin to ID everything to build their eBird lists. I lead bird walks for our local chapter and notice especially beginners tend to want to do this sometimes. She and many of us have learned birds the old-fashioned way since she doesn't even own a smartphone. Okay. Yeah. May I tack on to that one question that I've had over these past 10 years or so, that data that are being accrued in various surveys, censuses, are gradually being contaminated, maybe you could think of it, by findings, by detections that are not the same as they were when the CBC or the Breeding Bird Survey started in 1966. And anyway, thank you for your comment.
Yeah. Elaine, you're going to have to come back at me with the second part of that question. I didn't quite catch that. But the first part, um, I'm not going to judge anyone who wants to use Merlin to build up their eBird list. That's fine if that's what they want to do. Uh, if they think that that's a great way to learn along the way, then they may be misleading themselves because that's kind of a classic. That's analogous to the reading the paragraph over and over again strategy, and it's not a great strategy. Um, uh, Merlin can tell you a dozen times what that song is. Maybe it'll stick, but most of the time it won't stick just through that kind of incidental exposure. So it's not a great learning strategy, but it could be a fine strategy for building a list.
Thank you. I'm going to put my thing back a little because it's more a comment, I think. Let me start with B is asking, is Larkwire not available for Android?
Oh, yes. I unfortunately not yet. That is coming. Um, but I can't offer any ETA on that. I could go into that more, but the short answer is it's not available yet. And I know a lot of people wish it were, and I'm aware of that, and I'm sympathetic, but it hasn't come to fruition yet.
It obviously must be something difficult because your dedication is such you would have done it if it could have been
Well,
done.
it's so Android is a completely different platform. So until quite recently, that would have required building Larkwire completely from scratch over again for Android, and that's just not feasible for one person to do. Recent developments in technology may make it much easier for me to spin out an Android version, and I'm really looking into that now.
A couple of us who are starting to lose some of our hearing are commend the fact that Merlin will help fill in something of our awareness of what's around us, even if we can't hear it. That is a nice thing, but I don't think we're using that as a listing. But let me see if I can rephrase my comment. It's a comment. When the Breeding Bird Survey started in 1966, it was simply people and their eyes and ears. And now there are people, and it's not something that's being specified in the protocols, whether you can use Merlin, or if you do use Merlin, should you indicate it? And easily you can see how it's transmorgifying the bird detection. That's a hard one to say there.
Well,
So
that's actually a really interesting. That's a really interesting thing. I think we linked to it in the notes. There's a study out of University of Pittsburgh and the Schoonic Institute up in Maine. They looked at point counts and they compared the accuracy of human observers versus Merlin. And they found that the human point counts were better, somewhat better, not a huge amount better, but somewhat better. And they also found that two different devices running Merlin did not agree with each other all the time, which is not surprising. These are fallible machines, and so having said that, the opportunities from a conservation perspective of doing field observations in remote locations where you can't necessarily get a human being. I mean, it's just there's these are this is great technology. I'm not anti AI or anti Merlin in the slightest. Just know its limitations.
one of the thank you very much again for those references. One of the ones you sent me, Phil, was the one that was titled something like "Real Birders Do Better Than Merlin in Surveys." I'm sorry I haven't really digested it, but could you précis a little bit of what that said?
Yeah, well, I think that's the study that I was just referring to out of University of Pittsburgh.
Oh.
They systematically did point counts using both human observers and Merlin devices, and they compared the results. And the humans caught more species and made fewer mistakes. But
we don't know what the gold standard was.
They weren't that far off. And yeah, and in Merlin's defense, the thing about Merlin is it's getting better all the time. So, but that's the state of the art right now, apparently. At least that one study.
Thank you. Elizabeth is saying exactly what I'm thinking. I started to use Larkwire, maybe in the first couple of years, and I really need to use it again because you've changed and improved it so much. She also mentions the bird, I'll just say BirdNet seems to be another system that is put on some devices that you could use in your yard and so on. And I guess I hear that there are wrong IDs a lot. Obviously, you get out what you put in.
Yeah, BirdNet is I believe BirdNet was the initial inspiration for Merlin, and it's closely related. And I'm not sure what the current status of it is, but I think from what I remember, it's a pretty good what we call model. In other words, it's fairly well trained, and it can produce some impressive results. It's not nearly as convenient to use as Merlin, which is just set up to be at your fingertips.
Righto. One question, can you get sound testing for particular geographic areas? And I know the answer is yes. I mean, you've got examples of the same species in Southeast Arizona and Colorado and Washington, right? Say it better than I did.
Yeah, so there's two pieces to that. And I'm not sure exact. Yeah, so one is that we have Larkwire has pretty good geographic coverage. We go out of our way to try to ensure that we have representative samples that are not just geographically limited to one area. Of course, you can always have more coverage, but we're pretty good. But also, I think that question might have been getting at, can I customize Larkwire to focus in on a particular geographic area? And the answer is definitely yes. That if you saw in the demo that last playlist, which I didn't actually open up, but it was for Wiley Slew, and um, there's a when you create a playlist, you can manually select the species you want in the playlist, or you can go into a map and you can literally drop a pin and say, I want you to just give me all the species within 50-mile radius of this pin, or whatever radius you want. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty good at helping you focus in on the species that you're most interested in.
Excellent. Approximately $45 a year subscription for Larkwire, is that right?
Yeah, that is for access to all courses, unlimited courses. If
Right,
you only
right.
want one course, you can do a cheaper subscription.
There's a comment by someone who has a friend that uses BirdNet and insists that we have shorebirds in our housing development where there are no habitat or wetlands. We're in tall tree forest areas. That's always fun. Yes. Well, this one is my favorite comment. Thank you for making a program, the app, Larkwire, that's developed for learning, real learning, not simply ID. ID is excellent, but learning is what this was about.
Yeah, I really I love learning, and the second thing I love is building systems that help us learn more effectively. And I think that there's lots of room to do some really cool things. We in the future we will have better and better tools because learning is such a core part of what what makes this world so delightful.
Martha, Larkwire, yes, it can be used on a computer. There's a desktop version. Jazz
That's
is
right.
actually,
There is a web-based version that's
yeah.
accessible through any browser. Some Android users use it on their phone. It certainly was designed to be
Oh,
used on a computer, but any browser. The only limitation is I haven't really maintained it current. It doesn't have as many courses as the iOS app, but it's still the courses it has are great. And
oh, that's
uh,
great to know. Is
yeah.
there anyone out there that's an Android user that's tried that on their phone, using it out? Maybe not. Um, Chaz would like to ask you, what is a family subscription to Larkwire?
Oh yeah, so that's kind of an Apple thing.
Ah,
If you have a if you have a subscription, normally that is good only for you. If you have a family subscription, then you can designate four other people in your family or friends or whatever, who all share their content through Apple, and it's a way of sharing the purchases and subscriptions you have through Apple.
thanks for asking that. That's helpful. Right. Well,
Well,
it's too dark to go out right now.
yes, I knew it. I now have Sammy. I now have a new fun thing to do in retirement, and that's practice Larkwire. And we really want to thank you, Phil, for spending your time with us and sharing your wisdom about how these AI work. Again, thank you so much, Phil, for spending your time with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Sammy. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for all the great questions. And I'll see you out there.